The Florida Panthers got some bad news about Matthew Tkachuk, but it looks like they're running it back for a three-peat. What will it take for them to get there? Armando Velez of Locked On Florida Panthers joins us to talk about that and more next on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Gil Martin here. Welcome, everybody, to today's episode of the Locked On NHL podcast. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts so you never miss an episode. This episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show the host of Locked On Florida Panthers, the one and only Armando Velez. And Armando, heck of a run here for the Florida Panthers. They're keeping the core together, and yet a little bad news coming recently about Matthew Tkachuk. Why don't you fill us in?
Yeah, bad news, but expected news either way, because when you look at what happened with Matthew Tkachuk, where he tore the adductor off the bone during the Four Nations and suffered a sports hernia, missing the rest of the regular season. And even when he did return for the Panthers in the first round of the playoffs against the Tampa Bay Lightning, his minutes were limited. He averaged around 12 minutes per game. It's crazy because he also scored multiple times in the first two games, scored 3 goals in that span, but ramped it up as far as time on ice. But as far as the non-game days for Matthew Tkachuk, he wasn't practicing. The only time he would touch the ice would be on game days. And to think that I had an episode just last week of just discussing the report of Matthew Tkachuk kind of contemplating whether he should go for the operation or not, because the timeline would have been 5 months, at least that's the speculation from this time, for his return. But then you're thinking, does he actually want to go through kind of what he did similarly in the postseason, where the only time he would come on the ice would be for game days? But he went through it. He's expected to be out maybe around January, but this also goes into this timeline that we were all kind of speculating that he wants to be back for Team USA to compete in the Winter Olympics, which will take place in Milano Cortina. So that's the expectation for his return. Get some warm-up games, and then he'll be ready, as he's one of the first 6 named for Team USA.
How does this affect the Panthers, first of all, on the ice, and second of all, cap-wise?
When it comes to the cap for the Florida Panthers, right now they're $4.5 million over the cap. But for the majority of the offseason, right before the recent signing, which we'll discuss in just a few minutes, they are able to keep the band together. I mean, the signings of Aaron Ekblad, Brad Marchand, and Sam Bennett, took a lot of the team-friendly deals to return to the lineup. But there is that elephant in the room of what's going to happen to possibly guys like an Eetu Luostarinen, an Evan Rodriguez, or possibly a Jesper Boquist. They're one of the few guys on the roster who are on the one-way deals but don't have any no-move clauses. So those are the guys that a lot of Panther fans and media members like myself have been discussing of what could happen once Matthew Tkachuk is healthy and he is able to return to the lineup. But this is kind of similar to a position of what the Panthers kind of went through in the 2023 offseason. Anthony Duclair injures his Achilles during an offseason workout. The Panthers were kind of tight to the cap. The speculation at the time, should they trade Patrick Hornquist? And it worked out for the better, as unfortunately, as far as cap-wise, not for Patrick Hornquist himself, who he unfortunately suffered a career-ending injury with a concussion. And then that gave the Panthers to not only keep Patrick Hornquist, but also to keep him in the front office. They were able to activate Anthony Duclair, and that was the first of their 3 runs to the Stanley Cup final. So Bill Zito, we don't wish for injuries, but the keeping the guys together, maybe there will be something down the road of that will help the Panthers keep everyone together on the roster.
Now, the Panthers have signed a former first-round pick. Why don't you discuss that?
Not only a former first-round pick, but a childhood friend of Matthew Tkachuk as well.
There you go.
Luke Cunnin, raised in Missouri, along with Matthew Tkachuk, and also went through the US NTDP together with him. And also Bill Zito, he's also reuniting with him as Bill Zito. Right before becoming an assistant GM with the Columbus Blue Jackets, he was an agent. There's also he represented guys like a Tim Thomas, Antti Niemi, but also one of the ones not highlighted names that he did represent was Luke Kunin. So when Bill Zito represented Luke Kunin when he was an agent, he got a little bit of intel about his character and who he was as a teammate. So that truly helped make that trade when the Panthers did so in July of 2023. So bringing in Luke Kunin and what he brings on the ice, he scored double-digit goals 5 times in his career. Yeah, he's right now for his career, he's seen as a fourth-line grinder, maybe up to the third line. But in 434 games in his career, almost 900 hits. So he really fits that style of play that the Panthers are an intimidating bunch, a grinder that Luke Kunin is. So I think he's a guy who could possibly fit perfectly here. Likely the 13th forward for the Panthers, but he's gonna, even though the Panthers brought back even their entire fourth line, this brings competition to the mix. And I mean, when you're a Stanley Cup champion, especially going for a three-peat, and for the fact that the cap comes for everybody, in this case, really only 3 new guys into the lineup, this also brings a lot of good internal competition. First and third line, I would say, are for the most part set for this team. But I mean, it's the guys who are going to be competing for spots on the second line, like a Jesper Boquist and a Maki Semaskevich, and guys on the fourth line, like a Luke Kunin, maybe puts a little bit of pressure on the guys like an AJ Greer or Jonah Gadjevich. But also the thing that Kunin brings is that he could shift to center if needed. So a lot of other guys who have played center in the past shifted to wing. Now there's also a lot of that roster flexibility that once again the Panthers have such a luxury of.
What are the keys and the biggest obstacles to a three-peat? No team has done it in quite some time. So what's the key?
Yeah, it's never happened as a salary cap era. The last time it happened was your New York Islanders in the early 80s. So yeah, it's just going to depend on how this group is a year older. And obviously when you get a year older, you're not as fast as the year before. So it depends on how that is possibly could catch up for the Panthers. And I mean, their bread and butter is just dumping it into the zone, get on their aggressive forecheck, but it also comes down to their opposition, especially to the playoffs, on how much faster they are to getting to those pucks at the end board, and also getting the support for their other defensemen on the other corner as well. And I mean, the thing that the Panthers have prevented so well for their opponents is the inability to get that first pass out of the zone, keep the offensive zone time to one of the highest in the NHL. I mean, them in Carolina, they have been towards the top for the last few years. And I mean, to think that those two are ones that have met consistently in the conference finals 2 out of the last 3 years. And really, it's going to come down to if the Panthers could keep up with that. Yeah, injuries is the very obvious one for the Cats. But the fact is that in the beginning of the season, they're going to be able to roster 23 full players. When Matthew Tkachuk does come back, the cap is going to tell them 22 out of those possible 23 spots. So how are they going to manage things when Matthew Tkachuk is sidelined? So that first benchmark of Thanksgiving and even after, how are they going to manage things through the schedule? Because for the Panthers, usually their schedule is very home heavy at the end. This year, it's the opposite. It's at the very beginning, which their longest homestand past New Year's is only 3 games. Not a lot of matinee games neither for the Cats, as obviously when you're a Stanley Cup champion, you're going to be more on the primetime spots, more of those primetime games. So it's also going to be how do they respond when it's a Tuesday in the dog days of the season, and they're going to, with winning the last 2 cups, they have a target on their back. How do they respond to those teams who are going to be desperate, who are on the bubble of trying to make the playoffs as well?
Well, we will keep an eye on it. I know it'll be an exciting season ahead. Armando, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
They could find the podcast anywhere you listen to podcasts and on YouTube, and they could follow me personally on X at Monoman12. There's not really much exciting to discuss as far as the South Florida sports scene. The Marlins are not going to be making the playoffs. The Heat are in the state of mediocrity, and the Dolphins are a little bit of a wild card, no pun intended. I'm not very optimistic about their chances. So I guess for South Florida sports fans in general, we just got to wait for Panthers hockey to be back and for the chances of the hottest ticket in town to make some history as they are going for a three-peat.
All right. Thank you so much, Armando.
Thank you so much, Gil.
Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. College football is back, and honestly, there's nothing better than the energy of tailgates and being in the stands with your fellow fans. The only downside, trying to get tickets, endless queues, hidden fees, and prices that jump at checkout. That's why I use Game Time, the app that gives the advantage back to the fans. It's the easiest way to score last-minute tickets at the best prices with no surprise fees. What you see is what you pay. I pulled up Game Time, and in just a couple of taps, I saw amazing deals. I'm talking about your favorite college football games as low as $25. So take the guesswork out of buying college football tickets with Game Time. Just download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Game Time today.